war. War never changes, and Fallout 4 desperately wants you to know that. You would hope that given the number of times you hear the signature line at the most cliché of times, that they do a pretty good job of walking you through why that's a line worth repeating. Fallout 4 chooses instead to awkwardly, drunkenly stumble back and forth across the line of comedic and serious narrative, much the way that they drunkenly stumble across the gameplay finish line. Thankfully, the core gameplay is still strong enough to keep most people happy, but Fallout 4 left me feeling like Bethesda doesn't really know which direction they want to go with their franchise, or that they even care. Fallout 4 actually starts on a really strong note. The opening screen sets a very serious and determined tone with the title track, and follows that up with a powerful cutscene giving some context to the world pre-war, and the events leading up to the Fallout. I was honestly a bit surprised by this, and it excited me in that it set my expectations for a more thought-provoking adult stab at the post-apocalyptic world. That continued through most of the opening sequence, with good feels cranked up to maximize the bad feels after the bomb drops, all the way up to the point in which you finally get your hands on the first weapon and set out on your journey. Things were handled really well, aside for some painfully obvious plot points. Past that, however, is where the drunken stumble quickly takes over. Let's talk about the gameplay. If you played Fallout 3, then you know pretty much what to expect from Fallout 4 with relative accuracy. There are definitely some changes, many for the better, and some changes that will please some and displease others. Combat is identical, aside from VATS no longer freezing everything in time, and instead it simply slows things down drastically to some sort of Michael Bay level action sequence. I actually enjoy this change, and it keeps the game feeling fluid when you do choose to rely on VATS, which is likely to be pretty often. Of course, I can't not mention the Fallout fanboy life-ending, erection-inducing power armor, though it might have been a little too powerful for its own good. I will say that VATS felt somehow gimped in comparison to Fallout 3, and I have absolutely no real conclusive evidence for you. I just felt that no matter the perks or the situation, my percentages were often confusingly low. I could be not 3 feet from a super mutant while wielding a shotgun, and sure, I could just aim and shoot, but I wanted that Michael Bay explosion of blood and gore as I separated its head from its body. Much to my surprise, despite holding gun mere inches from its head, which was roughly the size of a small vehicle or refrigerator, I had a 35% chance of hitting him. I proceeded to miss both shots, only to simply shoot him out of VATS and end the fight in a far less impressive fashion. Incredible. Fallout 4 also introduces a fairly large and new crafting system, as well as a settlement building system. You can now, with the help of perks, upgrade weapons and armor, including your power armor, as well as craft food items to aid you in any number of combat scenarios or otherwise. You can also roleplay Bryan Cranston and cook wasteland meth and other drugs in case you need to get that extra edge in battle, or in case you need to stay up for a week straight building defenses and planting fields of potato plants for your settlers. Yes indeed, someone at Bethesda thought that it was necessary to have a settlement building minigame in Fallout 4. It's not that it's a truly horrible idea, and no, it's not forced upon you in any significant way, but the implementation is absolutely horrendous. Somehow, when this idea was pitched to be included, nobody thought that a building sim that is restricted to a first-person or limited third-person view would be perhaps a little more than clunky. The snap function is awkward at the best of times, the rules for what can go where are vague, and the restricted view from the ground makes everything that much more painful. Thankfully, I played on the PC, and so with the console option to turn no clip mode on, I could do what you should have been able to do by default: build from a bird's eye view. All of this is kind of rubbed in your face with the complete and utter lack of any meaningful tutorial system, and I really do feel for the console players who lack the patience to battle the building system. This isn't to say you can't hack your way through building some spectacular stuff if you have the patience, and probably a PC to be honest. Once you do build your giant phallic symbol for the gods both old and new, you may or may not choose to help defend your settlements when they come under attack by raiders and the like. Along with making sure your settlers have sufficient food, water, and shelter, you also build defenses to keep the baddies at bay, so you'll often not be needed for much anyway. In general, it felt like more of a shoehorn bit than a really meaningful addition to the game, but I'm sure that the modding community will do interesting things with it over time. The new gameplay theme of Fallout 4 is definitely centered on what to do with all that junk laying around the wasteland. In Fallout 3, the most I did was collect guns that were matches to my equipped weapons, allowing me to repair them on the fly in the field and save me caps and repair fees. In Fallout 4, Bethesda set out to make nearly every single item you come across useful in some way or another. Most of the time it gets all stripped down for materials that you end up using for crafting or settlement building. This time around, however, weapons do not require repairing, and so any spares you find lying around or strip off a newly limbless corpse are used for the components and or materials. This is all quite interesting and not always entirely necessary by any means, but a lot of the depth of Fallout 4 involves this junk, and as such I found myself roaming from point A to point B with my eyes firmly locked on the ground in search for another piece of scrap metal. Indoors, I was occupied with shelves and desks, and at some point I began to feel as though I was missing out on my actual surroundings. For those able to resist the loot urge, this junk focus is likely to not hamper you in any way, but for many people, I wouldn't be surprised if they feel similar to myself and get fatigued. I'm definitely all for the quest to make those items in the game worth more than their weight in gold, but I don't think Bethesda quite got all the way there on their first attempt. I do applaud them for the effort though. Other great improvements, though I mostly say that with my tongue in cheek, are the visuals and the audio. I was, and still am, a pretty huge fan of the Fallout 3 soundtrack, more specifically the Galaxy News Radio soundtrack. The selection of music suited the wasteland perfectly, and so when I heard that Fallout 4 was being treated to a multitude of new radio hits, I was pretty stoked. Similarly, I was excited when I found out that we'd be getting a real lighting system this time around. In case you forgot, Fallout 3 didn't actually have shadows, as crazy as that sounds. What little shadows the game had were actually just drawn into the textures and nothing more. Outside of the new lighting system, which is questionable depending on what you have your god rays set to, you're going to be looking at a pretty average game at best. Textures are incredibly low res by and large, and animations are classic Bethesda fare, which is to say they're horrendous. In fact, Fallout 4 is one of the best examples of Bethesda just not bothering to improve in any truly appreciable way. The soundtrack may be larger, but you have to jump through hoops to get to hear that expanded list. In fact, you'll think you never left the sweet sounds of GNR behind because you'll be listening to a large selection of the Fallout 3 list from Hour 1. Unfortunately, the radio host is no 3-dog. Instead, we are treated to the soul-crushingly bad Travis. For, as far as I can tell, still belongs latched onto his mother's left breast.
That's just what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not. It's probably not. Right? Segue. Back to the music, I guess.
Frankie Carl wrote a song about tomorrow. Or at least, I guess, his version of tomorrow. Which is pretty different from mine. Fucking jerk.
Apparently, there is a mission that you can complete that will give Travis a backbone and expand the music set list for your listening pleasure, but sadly, in my 82 hours of game time, I never came across the quest, and instead, I got to listen to the same handful of songs and listen to the same handful of reactions from Travis. Oh, we're gonna die! Oh! Travis, 2287. Why Bethesda decided that the first bunch of songs you should hear over and over again be those you've likely already listened to for a couple of 100 hours is beyond me. But then again, a lot of things in Fallout 4 are beyond me. It's time for some honest, unfiltered words. Why after 13 years are we still subject to the dead horse that is the Gamebryo engine? No, the Creation engine isn't new, it's just a rebadge. This is the engine that was in charge of driving Morrowind, just let that sink in. Sure, it looks decent, but the endless bugs that we've experienced for over a decade are still there, and even on my very high-end rig can't always push 60 frames a second at 1080p, much like in Skyrim. There's virtually no excuse to be getting the same bugs in Fallout 4 that we got in Morrowind all those years ago, but yet, here they are. On top of that, I don't understand why the animations still have to look like Terrence and Philip. When I watched the E3 trailer reveal on my livestream, I told everyone to just wait for a salesman and wait for him to look like a talking trash can. Lo and behold, Bethesda delivered. I mean, I'm Canadian, but please. I don't care how big the game is, because honestly Bethesda isn't alone at this level of scope anymore, not even on consoles. Any excuse the behemoth that is Bethesda could conjure up in response to criticism could simply be quelled with the words, "But The Witcher 3." The real answer is that they know that their fan base looks at their games now, and when they see how broken they are, largely laugh it off and say, "Oh, Bethesda, that's just a feature." They've managed to find immunity in their mediocrity, and it saddens me as someone who has so much love for their older games. They know that the modding community will fix most of it for them too, and now that mods can come to consoles, they have even less to worry about. It's absolute madness. Honestly, if people weren't so interested in my opinion of Fallout 4, I'd have not bought it. Not because I don't like the franchise, but because I'm tired of watching Bethesda crap all over their fans, and their fans just soak it up. I don't know. They just made so many strange and honestly ridiculous design choices that baffle me. I remember streaming my first or second session and I was in a situation in which dog meat literally disappeared after having been swallowed up by the pavement or running off somewhere for no reason, and I experienced both. I was over encumbered and hoped to give him some of my junk, but I couldn't find him. I wondered out loud, why isn't there a dog whistle, or the ability to whistle for your dog in the game at all? I mean, they have marketed the game so heavily around dog meat being your companion and you can't whistle for him. As it turns out, not 2 weeks later, it was revealed that Bethesda had a whistle in the game and then deactivated it in the code. What? Now thankfully, as usual, a modder found this and solved the problem. I think that despite the many oddities of gameplay and design choices, I still would have enjoyed Fallout 4 more if there were more intriguing characters. After the 80+ hours I spent in the game, I came across maybe 2 or 3 characters that were remotely interesting or made me feel invested. Of that small group, only one was a main character, and the others barely had any dialogue. It wasn't that many of the characters were completely awful, it was more that they simply did not stand out, or worse yet, didn't have much to say. It definitely felt that Bethesda attempted to simply hit a lot of the usual character archetypes and left it there. That by itself is pretty damaging to my experience with the game, given the rest of the offering was so thin. I feel as though my view of how Fallout 4 pushes itself along is perhaps too deeply rooted in my want for a far more serious tone, but between the gameplay and characters you'll meet along the way, I couldn't take any of the major plot points seriously. They were too encompassed by the light-hearted faux 50s comedic relief and often weak delivery. It's difficult to tell you exactly what I mean without spoiling, though people who watched my live streams of my playthrough will know, and those who have already played the game will also likely understand. All I can say is that when Bethesda wanted me to take something seriously, I was hard-pressed, given everything else, gameplay, and story both. Of course, outside of what I've already mentioned, I could probably write a novel on the little things that crop up and wear on you after a time. The inventory management for junk and other items is clunky, as is the Pip-Boy, although most people are likely just used to that now. The armor system is ridiculous in its line between what can and cannot be worn under a set of armor. Distant LOD textures will sometimes just not load, which allows you to roleplay Chris Angel, walk through walls, or more aggravatingly fall through the floors. Walking into any room while above 60 frames per second will result in the laws of physics being thrown out the door in the form of items just flying everywhere for no reason, which can totally kill you. For some people, corrupt save files are very much still a real thing. All enemies have the most bafflingly insane accuracy with grenades and the like, often planting one at your feet from well over 100 feet away, but are incapable of hitting you with a sniper rifle from the same distance. AI pathing and general intelligence hasn't improved in any capacity, which is to say, it's still pretty awful, and Dogmeat displays this wonderfully in his ability to walk over landmines, through tripwires or laser grids, or simply just get lost while stuck on a rock somewhere, and the list goes on. There are, of course, good things to say as well, they just unfortunately don't stack up to the bad. Bethesda has a great eye for hiding Easter eggs throughout the Commonwealth that will get a laugh or make you think. I thought it was particularly clever that the Fallout happened on Halloween, and so you will see Halloween decorations on your travels in stores and the like, which helps in no insignificant way frame the interruption of a way of life and the instantaneous nature of it all. If you are partial to the comedic side of the game, then you'll likely appreciate some of the truly eccentric characters you can come across that aren't part of the main questline, and perhaps enjoy offing a few of them with the satisfying weapons you'll get your hands on along the way. The limited cutscenes are also really well done despite some cheese, though their wonderfully warranted serious tone fights with the 50s comedic shtick, as I've mentioned before. Now, I've said a lot of negative things to this point, and I wish I could say it was my usual cynicism, and I imagine many people will disregard much of what I've said in this review as such, but I think I've put enough time into the game to say it's more than that. In most cases, if you've played Fallout 3 and enjoyed it, then you'll likely enjoy Fallout 4 as well, though your mileage will vary. Even as broken as it is, the game is, at its core, solid enough to get the job done, but that's about it. Nothing is likely to surprise you, not the gameplay, and especially not the story. It is what I can only describe as the most whelming game I've played in a long time. Buried under miles of nonsense and unimaginable mediocrity still lies a franchise that should be great. As with Skyrim and Fallout 3 before it, modders will take an extraordinarily average game and make it truly worth playing. As it stands, Fallout 4 is a game that will mostly be enjoyed by fans and tolerated by the rest. I wouldn't recommend paying full price for it unless you're incredibly interested, as there are far better games available today. It hurts me to say that about a Bethesda game, as I've put thousands of hours into their franchises, but it's the truth. I wanted so badly to love Bethesda games again, but unfortunately Fallout 4 is the first true example that Bethesda never changes.
He got somewhere to dine, then staggers in and sings sweet.